Hello guys, welcome to my channel. I hope everything is okay in your life. This video series has been prepared for general features of the classes in BDO to be conveyed to you by the Classmasters in appropriate way. The information contained in this video is limited and will not be a detailed guide. In the content you will meet, there will be an interview about the structure of the class in general. If you have friends around you who have questions about this class, they will probably be able to find general answers. The purpose of interview is to convey the class to you in a short and fun way. First, you will watch official trailer of the class, then we will start chatting with our guests. During the chat, I will add as many images as possible and try to provide you with a better information transfer. I hope you enjoy these contents. All these and similar classes will be completed and published in time. If you do not want to miss the moment when they are published, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification button. Enjoy watching. Well, hello and welcome guys. Today's guest is Shimeco for Sorceress class. Welcome Shimeco, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thank you so much. May you please introduce yourself? Who is Shimeco?
Hi, I'm Shimeco. I've been playing BDO on the NA servers for around 6 years now. I started back in early 2016. I've been playing ever since.
So, how did you find BDO? From a friend or website? How did you go into MMORPG games? How did you decide to play this game?
I first got recommended BDO actually from my stream. I used to stream Diablo 3 and Path of Exile way back in the day. When BDO came to Steam, they said, "Hey, have you heard of this game? I think you should check it out." and you'd enjoy it. So I did, and I had never really been big in MMOs before. Like, I played a little bit of World of Warcraft and some RuneScape, but the combat in BDO is what really hooked me, and that's what got me into it. But then also being able to play at my own pace and not get gated by like weekly resets or needing groups for dungeons and raids and stuff like that is what really kept me in it, because I could play as much as I want and I always felt like I was getting something done.
So how many years have you been playing your class? Is this your first class? Are there any other classes that you have started the game with or tried?
I've been playing Sorceress since I began BDO. It's the first class I tried and I loved it. The aesthetic was great. The color of the effects, I just enjoyed it ever since, and that's what I've mained. I've played a bit of Awakening Sage and Awakening Warrior, just, for fun, for something different, but 99% of the time I spend on the game is on my Sorceress.
Okay, is there any class that you tag?
Right now I have a warrior tagged. I just like to mess around with it for PvP since I primarily grind in Succession on Sorc now. Succession Sorc isn't the greatest duelist, so if I get attacked while I'm grinding, I have my warrior just to switch to really quickly to play around with and have fun. And if the fight turns into something where I need my Awakening Sorc for, I will go and change it. But right now, Sorc is like the main class I play, and warrior is just kind of a for if I need it situations.
Do you think your class is newbie friendly? How would you rate your class out of 10 in terms of difficulty in PvE, also PvP?
I think with the rework, Awakening Sorc especially became a bit more beginner friendly. The beauty of it is that while the basics still take a bit of time to like get used to and get comfortable with, so like the initial movement and cancels, you will spend a little bit of time learning, but once you get familiar with that, the kit is so strong on Awakening that the sky is really the limit for what you can achieve high end, both in PvE and PvP. It has all the tools that you need to succeed. It's just a matter of utilizing them properly. So like out of 10, I'd say Awakening for PvP is probably around like an 8. It can transition into the 9 range depending on what class you're fighting and what type of fight you're taking. Succession is much more streamlined and straightforward. In my opinion, I'd put it like right around like a 5 or a 6 in terms of ease of access, because it is a much more streamlined kit. It's much more general and down to earth. You can start grinding on Succession and know everything you need to know very quickly.
Okay. So do you prefer Awakening or Succession right now, and why?
This is a bit of a two-part answer. For high-end grinding, where I grind now, I much prefer Succession. The Succession kit is incredibly comfortable to play, and its damage output is in mostly forward guards, which for high-end spots such as Gyphon or Trolls or Hex, having the forward guards is much nicer in terms of comfort compared to super armors where you're forced to take the damage. And it's also much lower APM wise in terms of grinding for the same output. Like if you wanted to grind at the same efficiency on Awakening versus Succession, you're going to be pressing a lot more buttons on Awakening, and you're going to be taking more damage if you commit to actually DPSing the mobs because of the amount of super armor on Awakening versus the forward guards on Succession. But for PvP, Awakening's the way to go. Your tools, your kit is so much more complete on Awakening. Succession, I think its number one drawback for PvP right now is its lack of neutral game. There comes a point where on Succession, you don't have anything to do. And when you don't have anything to do, and you also lack something that's so fundamental as like an S block or a Q block, you become a sitting target. You'll just get blasted, and most of the time, it's not fun. There are some people who still enjoy dueling on Succession Sorc, but overall, I just feel like the class is incomplete for PvP, whereas Awakening, you have a surplus of protections and CC potential, so it is just substantially better for both the neutral game and in any sort of PvP fight you find yourself in.
So you know, and most of my viewers know, I published a TV tier lists video, and may you please analyze this Sorceress page in general, and I want to correct something in that. The mobility part of Succession, there is 1 star. It changed to 2 stars. So may you please analyze this?
Generally, overall, I feel like the tier list for Sork is in the appropriate spots. Early game for Awakening, it feels good because you can be more mobile. It has that mobility with your wings and your Shadow Leap and your Violation that can keep you going. And when you're one-shotting packs, you can keep your Z buff up pretty much the entire time. So having that bit of extra mobility is very nice. The durability being 4 stars, I think that really comes down to what spot you're at, because at some point you get to where these spots will deal damage to you, and since the majority of your damage output is super armors, you're going to take a lot of damage too, and so you have to be very aware of what you're doing on Awakening if you want to grind someplace like Trolls or Hex or Gyphon or Olins, because as soon as you stop to drop that super armor damage, you may have to cancel out of it and move, therefore losing DPS in order to not get one shot. For Succession, I absolutely agree. The in-game spot, Succession feels great. I think your durability could even potentially go up to 3 stars there, because you have so much forward guard damage on Succession. Your Violation is forward guard, you have forward guard on your Crow Flare, and your main source of damage, the Black Wave, is also forward guard, and it has a really nice AoE. The mobility, even at 2 stars, that sounds about right. Anywhere that you're spending 5 seconds or more on a pack, Succession Sork feels fine. If you're one-shotting packs and you're moving a lot, you're gonna find yourself just putting your weapons away and walking, because you will burn your stamina if you're trying to use what little mobility skills you have to try and go pack to pack someplace like, say, Poly, right? But even if you're somewhere where the mobs pull well, like Sakraya or Orcs, or you're someplace like Hex or Trolls where the mobs take a while to die, Succession is very nice, not only because of that forward guarded output of damage, but because you have skills that you can just rotate on a loop. You never feel like you have nothing to do, but it also doesn't break your hands like grinding a spot like that on Awakening will to achieve the same DPS output.
So I want to add this to newbies or returnees or whoever wants to reroll to Sorceress. He said that the durability of Succession and Awakening seems 3 stars, but I have to add this: if you get CC'd by some mobs, for example, while you're grinding it, Olens, almost the death is certain. I can say that because I know that she's fragile.
Yeah, that is true. You have to be very aware of your surroundings and what's going on near you.
So you talk generally about PvE and compare them. Let's talk about them in detail. May you please give us a bit information about Awakening PvE? Early game spots, what are you doing? Mid game spots, more like you need to pull mobs like Raya, Stars and Blood Monastery, or Stars and these kinda. End game spots like Gyphon, Rasia, Olin Valley, Hacker Sanctuary Trolls, even Crypt maybe, if you ever tried.
Awakening PvE is a lot of fun at low end spots. It really is. Because you can keep your Z buff up pretty much 100% of the time. You feel like you have a cheat code on, because you can Violation a pack and it dies, and then you Shadow Leap to the next one, you kill it. You can use pretty much any of your skills, and if it's one-shotting a pack, you have a lot of fun, and you have that mobility, and it can help you get familiar with your class early on in, okay, what cancels what is effective to use, what's not as effective to use, what makes me move faster, what locks me into an animation. You also have Mark of the Shadow, which is one of the best pulling skills for those upper mid-level spots like Sakraya and Star's End and Bloody Monastery, where the mobs move together really quickly. So using that Mark of the Shadow, it tags everything, they move to you, and you can just start comboing them. The PvE does get a bit more AP intensive the higher the AP requirement goes to stay on par with other classes, because you're using a lot of skills, and you have to use those extra skills to keep up the damage output that other classes do with less APM. Do you have to do it? No. But when you're grinding long sessions, if you're trying to, maybe not competitive nature, but when you are trying to get the most out of your time and your silver gain, it can lead to fatigue, especially if you're grinding long sessions on Awakening. When you get to the end game spots, we talked about it a bit before, but when your damage is in the form of super armors a lot, you will find yourself either taking more damage than you want to, or not putting out as much damage as you want because you have to move in order to not get hit. And so I think that's one of the drawbacks that Awakening does have when you start getting into high-end grinding, is that there are some places, for example, I grinded Gyphon a lot. There are some places where you find you're just having to stop your DPS to avoid getting hit, and that can be a little frustrating. Also, Awakening Sorc can be very, very mana hungry. So you either have to stock up on potions, or if you're like me, I like a chill grind. I use Spirit Perfume elixirs a lot because it just, if it's not something I have to worry about when I'm grinding, the more comfortable that grind becomes.
So let's talk about PvP for Awakening. 1v1, 1vx, 3 versus 3, Solar, and large scale. What this class is doing in these changes?
Awakening Sorc has so much potential in PvP. Like, you really can do anything with the proper build and practice. Your iframes are the best in the game, so you have the potential to be a phenomenal duelist. As you learn the matchups, you can find the gaps that you can exploit and capitalize, but you can also avoid most of the incoming damage just by positioning yourself correctly. That utility is great. Sure, there are matchups that you don't line up into the best, but knowing your class as well as the class that the opponent is playing can lead to you emerging victorious in places that not every class has the potential to do. There are some classes that seem to auto lose matchups, and I feel like Sorc doesn't really have that. As long as you're playing well and you're paying attention to what your opponent is doing, I feel like Sorc in 1v1 has the potential to win any matchup, given the proper amount of time and focus is given to it. And that sort of transitions into 1vxing. With that iframe utility, I also think that your 1vx potential is one of the best in the game. Because you have those iframes, you have the best in-fight mobility in terms of staying alive. If you utilize those iframes, you don't have to worry as much about incoming damage as other classes do. The stamina adjustments have made it a bit more thought intensive, but the tools are all still there. You have your shards, you have your protections, and you have really solid damage. So the key to 1vxing is identifying the classes that you're fighting as soon as you can, so you know what potential they have on you. You identify the grab classes so you know what to look for, because once you recognize what classes you're fighting, you can keep track of all the skills they're using, so you can determine the best time to stop and do your attack. Because your iframes don't do damage. You still have to stop iframing at some point in order to put out damage, but knowing your class matchups and being conscientious of where you're standing and keeping track of your resources and cooldowns will lead to you 1vxing very well. Her kit is so loaded with CCs that you can disrupt a team. And I think that that's where the combination of the iframes into Sorc's skills really becomes powerful, is because you are loaded with so many CCs that once you decide that it's safe to stop and you can start applying the pressure, you can get the CCs in a 1vx scenario, and even in large scale, to where you can stall out enough players to where you can focus down the one or two that are left, and you either kill them or you live long enough for your team to come in and back you up.
So what about Solar and large scale?
So for Solaire's an interesting spot because you don't have the damage that you normally would in open world. So in Solaire, you have to pay much more attention to CCs and CC timers. KDs are incredibly valuable in Solaire knockdowns because it's one of the longest lasting CCs in the game. If you want to play Sorceress in Solaire, you need to learn how to combo. Knowing how to combo properly and efficiently based on what skills you have available will significantly improve your damage output compared to what you can normally get away with in open world. Because that AP scaling is so low in Solaire, your value to a team comes more from the disruption and the proper application of damage than it does just iframing in, dropping your super armor damage and leaving. Large scale sort of transitions the same way. If you're doing cap, you're more focused on your utility as opposed to necessarily the damage that you deal. But in Node Wars and Siege Wars where there are no caps, the sky is pretty much the limit. Again, because you have that iframe utility, you can put yourself in situations that almost every other class can't. You can keep yourself alive, you can drop a lot of damage, you can disrupt rebuilds because you have an enormous amount of CCs in your kit, but you can also ball v ball skirmish if you want to, because you still have that protected damage utility as well. So the sky really is the limit when it comes to large scale. You can perform pretty much any role in one way or another, aside from, maybe flying into a tree and placing a cannon. Sorc doesn't really have the best point A to point B quick mobility, but other than that, in fights, your limits are almost non-existent. You can do just about anything.
So you talk enough about Awakening. Let's talk about Succession. First, PvE, early game, mid game, and end game splits.
I think Succession PvE is absolutely incredible at the high end. I've come to really enjoy it because it's easier on the hands. It's much more streamlined and straightforward. You don't have to sacrifice your damage in order to stay alive. As long as you position yourself properly before you drop your damage, because it's forward guarded, even at places like Hex and Olins and Trolls, that forward guard utility is so convenient. You can last the entire duration of your skill, get out all your damage before you have to move and reposition. At lower end grind spots, I do feel it falls off a bit because of the lack of mobility. If you are one-shotting a pack on Succession and then having to move, it gets very, very tedious because you start running out of mobility, you start going low on stam, and it just starts to feel clunky. And on Sorceress, the beauty of Sorceress is the cancels, the utilization of all the skills. When it starts to feel clunky, it becomes unfun. But anywhere that you're spending about 5 to 10 seconds a pack, Succession feels very well suited. So even places like Sakraya, Star's End, Bloody Monastery, where the mobs pull quickly and will walk with you, you can utilize Succession very, very well. It's only at the places where you Thanos snap the mobs and they get one-shotted that it doesn't feel very well.
Okay, thank you. So what about Succession PvP?
Personally, I don't really recommend Succession PvP. The kit just lacks tools for it to feel really good. It can be a ball skirmisher sometimes, especially if you play from further back and you just throw your range damage. But overall, it lacks that crucial neutral game to make it feel good, and it just leaves you very vulnerable a lot of the time. There's some people who still play Succession in PvP, but they're few and far between, because once you run out of skills, especially if you run out of skills and there's no one nearby for you to hit, so you also can't regain shards, you become a sitting duck. You don't have an S block or a Q block like some Succession classes do, like Succession Sage or Succession Hash. So sometimes you are just standing there because your only reliable forward guard is Crowflare, but Crowflare is on a 3-second cooldown. There will be some times that you just find yourself in a bit of a dead spot, and it feels kind of rough not having anything to do and no way to keep yourself protected. And with the range and speed that a lot of classes have these days, that instant where you don't have anything to do, people can just capitalize on immediately, and you find yourself just feeling a little lackluster.
Thank you. So I think you summarized well. Let's talk about game itself. What do you think about BDO for current situation from past until now? You're a 6 years old BDO player and you have a lot of experience and you can share with us.
Overall, in terms of like class viability, I think BDO is in one of the best states it's ever been in. You can find a place for just about any class that you want to play somewhere. It might not necessarily, every class isn't great at everything, but almost every class can do something well, whether it's grinding, whether it's 1v1, whether it's small scale, whether it's large scale. And I think that they did a pretty good job of tackling that. However, I wish that the balance team would be a bit more active in the community, would reach out to some of the more, not even necessarily more prominent players, but people that are actively PvPing, that can speak from an unbiased point of view and provide feedback based on what's actually happening in the game, as opposed to what's presented via the mediums that we know they use, i.e. like Siege KDA, which I don't think is an accurate representation of the state of the game always. And I think that they should take a bit more of a modest approach to making changes. I think they should do smaller changes more often, make tweaks, as opposed to doing big drastic chunks of changes once or twice a year, because you go from having a class that's broken to a class that's unplayable, as opposed to slightly tweaking things over time. And the most recent example of this for me, I think, is the warrior changes. They changed DP stacking, the duration, and the intensity of grave digging slow all at once. And I think that if you're trying to take an approach of putting a class in a more reasonable, moderate spot for whatever situation you're trying to adjust it for, I think you make those small adjustments one at a time. You give it a bit of time in game, check how the performance is, and then you revisit. But if you take all three of those notable things from a class's kit at one time, I think it can lead to a more drastic effect, and you won't necessarily get the meaningful feedback that you need, because you're going to get a lot of people overreacting and getting over emotional and just refusing to play a class completely because of the huge changes, as opposed to if you tweaked it one step at a time and allowed for feedback to come in from everyone, as opposed to the few hot-natured people that like to make their opinions known.
So if you have a chance to add a new feature to BDO or change something, what would it be?
There are a few changes I'd like to see seen in the game. The number one thing would probably be tuning back protections of every class. I think that SA trading metas just lead to more stagnant gameplay, and it lessens the opportunity to close the gear gaps between players via skill difference. One of the beautiful things about BDO when I started was that on the lower end of gear, I felt like I still had a chance against higher geared players because I could play better than them. But as more and more protections get introduced into the game, if all you're doing is SA trading, it really does just become a gear check. It's a matter of, can my gear line up better than your gear? And it becomes less about player potential. Another thing is the dead items in PvE. When Gyfin first came out, it was absolutely nuts in terms of the rare drop. The Forest Furies, the Horse Mats, Krogdala Stones, etc. They absolutely flooded the market and tanked the prices. Then they retroactively changed it, and some of those items have become a bit more sought after, but the price is still destroyed, and other ones are still in surplus. I think that more consideration needs to be given to items when new spots get released because of the long-term impacts it can have for grinders. This is a grindy game. You spend a lot of time grinding. If you take a look at Calpheon Elvia, when it first came out, Despairs and Scorched Sun Shards were incredible. You give it another couple months from where we are now, those items people are not going to be buying anymore, because when you introduce new items that are not consumable in a way where the item, it can be used for utility but it doesn't go away, you will end up having an overload of those items. You'll have a surplus of them on the market. For example, once everyone gets their alchemy stone cups, due to the nature of the alchemy stone system, people are not changing alchemy stones. For most players, you get your Vel's Heart and it's done. You don't ever touch another alchemy stone. Well, one Vel's Heart needs one cup. Once a player has that cup, there's no longer a need for those despair shards anymore. So as time goes on, you have more despair shards than there is uses for them. The same thing can apply to BMCs and magical shards. If you start introducing more and more spots that give them a surplus of BMCs, while the magical shards are consumable, lack of uses for them leads to there being a surplus of BMCs. One other slight change that I think is just outdated is the alchemy stone system. There should definitely be more viability to reaching alchemy stones besides a Vel's Heart. The system for polishing and improving alchemy stones, as well as just alchemy stone availability, is just outdated. There used to be a surplus of alchemy stones way back in the day. Now there's not, because the places and the methods that you use to get them are no longer relevant in the state of the game. And the interface for polishing and updating them is an absolute pain to use. It takes so much time, and there's really no benefit to it being the way that it is now. And then why are pre-awakening weapons still 2 AP less than awakening weapons at this point? And before anybody says just use an Offen, the stat loss from an Offen is just not. At in-game, you don't want to use that. If you're using two pin black stars, like the majority majority of in-game players should, especially if you're still a grinder at in-game. Why can I not achieve the same pre-awakening AP as awakening AP? I think that that is something that should have been visited when succession classes were released. I think that there should be some way to lessen that gap, whether it's a consumable or an attachment to a main hand weapon. I just think that's something that should be looked at. As for adding something, I would love crystal presets. Changing your crystals is so tedious. There are many instances where I've found that I would love to have different crystals, but actually having to go through the process of either making a crystal extraction tool or buying the pearl item, switching the crystals just to go do what I was doing and travel from a town back to PvP or from PvP to town to change the crystals to then go to back to grinding. It would be great to have different crystal presets, especially for someone like me who plays on a poorer internet connection. I have crystals that I don't utilize right now, my gen special attack evasions, because I know my internet's not reliable, so I take them out. I take them out when I go grind because sometimes my internet likes to feed me to mobs. I wish that there were a more convenient way to transition between those crystals that I want to use in different scenarios. I would like to use a different set of crystals for 1v1s based on my matchups, for large scale, and then for PvE. I think it would just provide a nice utility, and we already have something like that in Solaire. The crystal changing in Solaire is very convenient, and I think that if we could introduce something like that into the main game, it'd be very healthy.
So what are your advices for newbie or returnee players or whoever wants to reroll Sorceress in general?
My advice to new players is definitely play the seasons. Seasons are excellent for getting you started with a solid baseline of gear to build your character off of. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to find the people that are playing the class that you want to play, that you want to learn, and just ask. Browse Twitch. Browse YouTube, ask away. Most players love passing along their knowledge of their class to beginners, to people wanting to learn, because we spend all this time on our class learning it inside and out, upside down, and being able to pass that on to someone else who has also got that eagerness and willingness to learn just makes the game overall a healthier place. Like, BDO has one of the best communities in terms of players willing to help each other that I've seen.
So we are coming towards the end of the interview, and is there anything you would like to add?
The Black Desert Directory has been one of the most welcoming communities I've ever been a part of. Twitch, YouTube, in-game, all of it. I'm really proud to be a part of it because every game has its toxic members, but the community as a whole in BDO has just been an absolutely excellent experience. I also want to give some shout outs to a few people. First is my mentor, Dimhauser. I wouldn't be here doing what I did if it weren't for the time that you spent teaching me early on. Cass has been my testing partner for over a year now. Whenever I have new ideas, whether it's for Sorceress or for the game or for crystal builds in general, that's who I bounce it off of. That's the person who takes time out of their day to come and help me with my theory crafting, my build combos, everything when it comes to playtesting. Cass and I work with each other. And then shout outs to the OG Sorks, Masilas, Fantus, Hedon, Shulky, even Zachary, Alki, Jacko, Spirit of Sun, and Aru. Like, if it weren't for you guys, I wouldn't have the knowledge that I do, and I wouldn't be able to pass it on to everyone else through avenues like this. So seriously, from the bottom of my heart, anyone who has taken time to work with me and discuss things, thank you. I appreciate it. You've all been an integral part of my BDO journey, and I hope to continue on with it. And thank you for having me for the interview. It's been an absolute honor. For a very long time, I didn't feel like I was in a position to where I had the knowledge to talk about things like this. And so you reaching out and us putting this together and the combination of our communities, I think has been an excellent resource for the people that this video is going to find their way to.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to you. You accepted my invitation and you shared all the knowledge to newbies, returnees, or whoever wants to reroll the Sorceress, and many other valuable knowledge about the game itself. Thank you so much. And guys, please, you should definitely check his streams. He mostly streams when he's free and he is very open to help people. You should definitely check his streams. You can find the stream links in the description section. Thank you so much, Shimeco.
Thank you. And yes, seriously, please, anytime, I welcome questions and I'm happy to help.
Alright guys, Do not forget, BDO is just a game. Have a nice game.